welcome to the India Development Debate. I'm Tamanna Inamdar, and we have an action-packed show lined up for you today. Well, the gloves are clearly off. There is no secret now about the fact that India will retaliate to China and retaliate in terms of investments, in terms of trade, in terms of commerce. That's where the quote-unquote battleground seems to have also shifted. The latest salvo, in a sense, coming from Union Minister Nitin Gadkari, who has been quoted by news agencies as saying that there will be no Chinese investments, including in joint ventures in any Indian highway projects or in MSMEs. This also comes on a day when Union Minister Ravi Shankar Prasad, in the context of 59 apps being banned, has talked about how this is a great opportunity for homegrown companies to really come forward, and new policies will be formed to this effect. Over the last few days, we have also seen some sort of an action, though not clearly defined as such, of checking of consignments coming in from China. Now, all of these have led to some kind of bluster and statements from China, but the question is to sit back and look at what the line of action has been so far, review it, and what we can do in the future. Does all of this lead to anything concrete? These are a few of the key questions we will be addressing right on top of the show. We, of course, have a lot more lined up for you, so stay tuned. But first up, I have with me Dr. Kanwal Sibal, former diplomat and former foreign secretary. Jayant Dasgupta is joining us on the show today, former ambassador and former permanent representative of India at the WTO. Manoj Joshi, distinguished fellow at the ORF, and Blaise Fernandes, director at Gateway House, all on the show this evening. Welcome to all of you. Let me get a take from you first, Mr. Joshi, on the action that we have seen so far, and mostly in, at least in government circulars and in official terms, none of the communication explicitly names China. And I think this is an important point to look at as well. Does the strategy seem to be sending a message more than anything else?
It's just about sending a message. The reality is that India doesn't really matter to the Chinese economy. We are very small players when it comes to investment in China. We're very small players when it comes to trade with China. My own view is that we're only hurting ourselves. If the Chinese companies come and build roads in India, who benefits? Now, this kind of hyper-nationalistic kind of fervor that is being raised, I think it's being raised just for political purposes. The government needs to deal with the border situation. They didn't deal with it properly, and now they are utilizing this to crack down on Chinese companies. But as I said, we don't matter much to China unless we can get a whole coalition, unless we can, even the United States, which wants to decouple with China, is taking very cautious steps, and they are focusing on specific industries where they are very strong, which is namely the chips. Wherever in semiconductor industries, the US is very strong. So they've banned ZTE and Huawei, and that hurts China enormously. There's nothing we can do in the trade front, at least, that will hurt China.
Okay, Dr. Kanwal Sibal, how do you see this? Do you see this more as posturing and gestures rather than sort of an internal cleanse of sorts for India to now wean ourselves off Chinese dependence?
I absolutely disagree with what Manoj has said, and I hope he doesn't mind my saying that. Now, if you look at China's interests in Africa or around us in Nepal or in Sri Lanka or in Bangladesh, are they big markets for China? Certainly not. Certainly not. And India today is the fourth or fifth largest economy. It is said to become the third largest in a decade or so. And then, you know, into 2049, 2050, we will possibly be the second largest economy in the world. But let's not look that far. If you look at what is going to hopefully happen in the next 5, 7, 10 years, India will be much more than a $5 trillion economy. And it has a lot of pent-up demand of infrastructure. And in the digital economy, there are huge opportunities in India. In all sorts of areas, there are huge opportunities. And China has that mistaken belief that India needs desperately Chinese investment for its economic growth. If you read Global Times and all the articles that appear, which I do read, this is the kind of thing that they have.
Now, we are using the same medicine. On a separate note, Mr. Sibal, just do continue, but on a separate note, how seriously should we take such propaganda coming in? Because we know it's not aimed at the local Chinese audience, right? All of this is happening on social media platforms that the Chinese are not even, able to access. Is this more, and I see a lot of Global Times being bandied around, is this more of an effort to rile us up?
No, I think, you see, this is Chinese government's tactic. They don't want to say certain things officially. And they have these researchers and professors in Tsinghua University or here or there, on Fudan University, or in Shanghai, in some well-known institution, to write these articles. But they do convey Chinese thinking, which officially they don't want to because of a different kind of a system. And these are warning signals that they send as part of their psychological warfare, as part of intimidation, etc., etc. Now, we are using the same medicine against China, which China has been using against other countries, whether it's Australia or Japan or Mongolia or other countries where they threaten them, or Canada, where they threaten them with the economic sanctions because they think they hold an upper hand. Now, in the areas in which Chinese are interested, the digital economy especially, we have very clearly said that we're going to use the national security clause to keep them out. And now you mentioned that we don't want them in the infrastructure area. In any case, they're not very big in the infrastructure area. But this is potentially an area in which there could be big gains for Chinese companies. Now, when they have this trade war with the United States, they need other markets. Which are the other markets? Japan is not closing up, but Japan is also tightening up. Australia definitely is tightening up. Canada is tightening up. European Union wants to have a fresh look at the non-reciprocity in the relations between EU and China. And here comes India, which is also going down the same road of trying to limit the opportunities for Chinese companies in India. In the immediate, Manoj may be right, it may not cost them very much, but we are not living in the immediate. We have to see ahead. And I think it's a big blow that has been administered on China and its belief that India will not be able to act on this front because India desperately needs a Chinese investment, which is not true.
But to what extent, Blaise Fernandes, why don't you come in here? Mr. Sibal mentioned a little while earlier that there isn't a great, or I think Mr. Joshi also mentioned a little while earlier that there isn't a great amount of investment in any case in our infrastructural projects. But there is a lot of investment in, say, the startup ecosystem. There is a huge amount of trade which already exists. And so far, the conversation has been about how India needs to be pragmatic as we move ahead and try and give a message, etc. It makes more sense to first become independent before making such moves. Do you see a sense that we aren't going to really wait that long?
Let's look at it not in isolation of the 56 to 57 apps. These apps were part of China's digital Silk Road. A very calibrated decision by the government of India. They've kept the utility apps outside the banned list. The utility apps are the apps that generate employment, generate economic activity, cause inconvenience to consumers. Apps for Chinese investments are very high. What they've targeted is the utility apps, the service apps, which file sharing apps, the vanity apps. Vanity apps are things that you can live without. Life will move on without TikTok. TikTok wasn't there 3 years ago. TikTok is not there today. Life will move on. We've got enough of ample ammunition in terms of, enough of entertainment options to kind of enjoy these apps and, entertain ourselves. But imagine TikTok now, let's take an example of TikTok. 30% of the TikTok users are located in India. Very small fragment of revenues coming. I buy that argument. But the digital story, the India digital story is a very powerful story. And TikTok has an IPO coming out soon, which is valued around about $100 billion US. Every Wall Street analyst, every researcher, every venture capitalists will be asking, you're not prevalent, how are you going to account for that 30% market? Likewise, a lot of these Chinese apps belong to the BAT family, Baidu, Alibaba, and Tencent, who are all in the valuation game. Not being present in India, where you have an ecosystem of 450 million users going up to 800, questions are going to be asked on Wall Street across the bourses in Hong Kong and Shanghai. Yes, there is an economic impact without actually hurting us, because these apps have no economic value in India, just entertainment value or vanity value. The last point that I want to make is they've also kind of been very careful on the security apps. UC browser is nothing but a front for Chinese propaganda. And therefore, they also need to kind of look at from a security angle. WTO has enough of rules to kind of protect, and they cannot go to the WTO. I'm sure Mr. Dasgupta will probably point that out in his discussions. So a good decision, a calibrated decisions, and yes, there's going to be a financial impact on these apps.
But that's about the apps. I don't know if we are looking at it from the right angle and the right question. Mr. Dasgupta, so far the question has been, how much can our actions hurt China? I think we should start looking at what the implications of these actions are for us. How much they can help us, or do they further our cause?
I think there are several aspects to the question that you have asked, Tamanna ji. The first one is about investment. The Chinese have invested just about $8 billion or so, of which $5.5 billion are in the tech industry and startups. And they have invested there because, of course, the valuation of these companies is going up very fast, and they would have either consolidated their holdings or sold off their investments as venture capitalists in these companies and made a neat profit. So that is there, but $5.5 billion in an economy of about $3 trillion is not much. And that too, if you take the past 20 years or so. So we can do without the Chinese investments in the tech and the startup industry. As far as the point about infrastructure is concerned, the Chinese have hitherto not invested in our infrastructure. Of course, they are wanting to come in very dearly. Why? Because we have not allowed the Belt and Road Initiative to embrace India.
Yes.
We have been one of the staunch opponents of the Belt and Road Initiative. So allowing them to come in and bid for these very large infrastructure projects would just have been opening the back door to let the Chinese come in. The second point that I wanted to mention in this context is, can we, live without dealing with China on the commercial front? And there I would say that we have to take a calibrated decision. For instance, for many of the intermediate products, components, etc., and very often on television it has been mentioned, auto industry, pharmaceuticals,
Yes.
there are a host of industries. So there we will suffer very badly if we suddenly switch off the supply line. So we have to take a calibrated decision there. As far as the last point is concerned about consumer goods, on the commercial front, for instance, television sets and air conditioners and other things, I don't think it is really going to make much of a difference in the long run. But in the short run, yes, there can be some problems, but because we are again dependent on not only the finished product, but on the components as well. So as far as finished products are concerned, we can definitely come down heavily on them in whatever way. And the last point I wanted to mention is that if we are, and Minister Gadkari has been very clear on that,
Yes.
don't hold up these consignments on account of whatever reason at the port, because they have already been paid for by Indian companies. So it is going to be at our cost that the holdup is taking place. So please ensure that there is smooth movement at the port, and our domestic industry is not.
No, so then the question is what action can we take, and should we take action on the commercial front? I mean, no one is officially saying it, but I don't think it's a top secret anymore from where these actions are emanating. Manoj Joshi, you want to come in on this? How far do you think this will go? And clearly, so far at least, there seems to be no move to suddenly cut off supply chains, which will harm ourselves. But where is then the scope for, tightening in and sort of cleansing the system? And unmute itself, please.
Well, you're right. I think Mr. Dasgupta has also brought out the point of intermediate good. China is not only a producer of finished products, and we are not only large-scale importers of Chinese products, but Chinese intermediate goods are there in almost all the products. Meaning, if you buy a Samsung phone, you're going to have Chinese components there. If you're going to buy a Japanese product, you're going to have Chinese components there. So we'll eventually hurt ourselves. So my point is that when we are trying to deal with a border situation, something happened on the border. We need to deal with it there. Taking it into the sphere of commerce, etc., I think is a slippery slope. Because I think it's a slippery slope which will only lead to self-harm. And you have to be absolutely cold-blooded about this.
But can you really de-link the two? Can the two really be completely 100% de-linked when we are so dependent on Chinese goods for many intermediary products as well?
You're asking me?
Yes, Mr. Joshi.
Yeah, can you repeat that, please?
I'm saying, can you completely de-link what's happening with the border, with the trade and commerce angle?
Yes.
Should you?
You see, the thing is, my point is, we have got to get even with China, okay? Meaning, if that is the national aim, is that we, as the old American saying goes, don't get mad, get even.
Yes.
Okay? And what's the best way of getting even? The best way of getting even is if we get sustainable, high rate of economic growth is the best path of getting even with China. Now, the point is here, if you're going to use the Hindi phrase, put an axe to your own foot, you see, you're going to create problems because the fact of the matter is, why I'm saying is that if the Chinese want to build roads in India, let them build. They can't take it. They can't take it away. See, what I'm saying is,
is that the equivalent of what we are doing?
I think based on the digital economy, the government hasn't cut its nose to spite its face. At the end of the day, India digital story is very strong. We've just seen one particular company raise, a lot, trillions of rupees to kind of sustain their further growth. Okay,
sorry for the introduction, Mr. Fernandes, but here in the digital economy, you're just talking about apps right now.
No, we're talking, listen, at the end of the day, apps is the precursor.
Investment coming in from China.
Okay, not much. Actually, China is one set of pool. You've got a lot of money coming in from the Middle East, from the sovereign funds in the India digital story. You've got Europe to be tapped. You've got sovereign funds from Europe to be tapped. American companies, venture capitals from America and the East Coast and the West Coast are investing in the India digital story. So the startup economy is not going to be dried up. Plus, a number of Indian companies have raised capital in the last 6 weeks or 8 weeks. That money is going to come in. And it's high time that the Indian Navratnas also come to the party in the terms of the startup economy. But as I said, do not look at this app ban in isolation. Look at it connected to the digital Silk Route, eventually leading to 5G. And that's the elephant in the room that India has the levers to. 5G is nothing but a 3-tier cake, the bottom tier being the BRI and the digital Silk Route, the second tier being made in China 2025, and the third tier being China standards 2035. If the legs of the cake are weak and India doesn't take on, don't look at it from the digital point of view. One, like America is not taking Chinese 5G. India doesn't take Chinese 5G. I think you're going to have cake on the floor. And China needs to sustain its economy based on manufacturing 2025 and standards.
So good point. Long term.
We have the leverage.
Strategy. Okay, long-term strategy.
Not long-term, man. Not long-term. 5G is another 6 to 12 months.
So what next then, Kanwal Sibal? What next? Where do we go from here? Clearly, cutting out supply chains for intermediary components, etc., in the medium to short term is not an option that most say we should even look at. So then where all should we even look at? And to the point that Mr. Joshi made, that what's happening at the border and what's happening with commerce and trade should be kept separate.
But why isn't this advice given to China? I mean, China is constantly using the economic lever against countries. Why is that? Does it make any sense? Or the Chinese are being utterly foolish, and Chinese are cutting, their own nose to spite their face, or axing their own foot? Well, why isn't that argument being made? No, I don't agree with this argument at all. Look, we are not a two-penny, half-penny economy. We are already a 3 trillion economy with a big future ahead of us. And the relationship between India and China is not for tomorrow. If China continues to be so hostile to us strategically, and there's no let up in this hostility, there cannot be a strong economic relationship. It is out of the question. And we have been hesitant to do this because we took this decision that we will leave the border issue to be decided as and when the whole thing matures. In the meantime, try and normalize relations with China, whichever way we can. But this is not a sustainable policy, and it has become unsustainable after what they have done in Ladakh, etc. And therefore, there has to be a response from us. Now, the second thing is, look, United States is now engaged in a trade war with China, and they have a total of $700 billion of two-way trade. Now, somebody would say that, look, it's all very foolish. They're so highly interdependent, and there are costs to be borne by United States if it goes down the road, but they've gone down this road. Japan has floated a $2.2 billion fund to ask the Japanese companies to move out of China and locate themselves in Japan. Other countries are also now very closely looking at over-dependence on China in terms of the supply chain. Now, it's true that nothing is going to happen tomorrow or day after, or even in a year or two. But once a certain direction is set, this is the road down which all countries are going to go. And China cannot achieve all the ambitions that Mr. Fernandes mentioned if the rest of the world actually looks at what China is doing, its aggressiveness, its ambitions, its expansion.
Mr. Joshi, you want to quickly respond?
And they were going to pay a big price for this.
Yeah, you want to.
And we are now taking certain initial steps which are in the right direction, but it's not as if we are going to cut off the economic relationship with China immediately. That is not the government policy.
Mr. Joshi, you want to quickly respond to the point about, trade being one arena to send out diplomatic messages? Unmute, sir.
Trade is something with which you send out diplomatic messages, but there are other ways as well. We could, for example, build coalitions with Japan. Now, I think Ambassador Sibal mentioned the $2.2 billion, but that's nothing. They would not even get half a company transferring back to Japan on that money. I've looked at the data, I've looked at the US data and others. The US itself, as I said, is focusing only on semiconductors. They may take action in other areas, but they are doing it step by step. In India, what is happening is you're virtually getting a situation where the customs, kind of delayed stuff, which as Mr. Dasgupta pointed out, our own industry is being affected. Now, if you have in the pharma industry, if you start blocking API from China, you'll only damage your own pharmaceutical industry. It'll take you 10 to 15 years to set up your own API if you start today.
No, I get it.
So it's not a. So what I'm trying to say is that
TV you bought with your own money.
No, so, that's why. My point is, be cold, calculating in your actions. Don't get carried away by hyper-nationalism. And my critique of the government is that they are really trying to fool the public because they've goofed up. They've screwed up big time up in Ladakh. They did not take the warnings. There were intelligence failures in the process, and now they're trying to cover it up by raising this hyper-nationalistic boycott China kind of fervor, which I think is inducing self-harm in this country.
Okay, so the moves have to be calibrated. The moves have to be calibrated going forward. It has, but I don't think anyone will disagree that we need to reduce the dependence. We need to reduce the dependence starting today. We have to find sensible ways to do it. And it's something which not just India, the whole world is now looking at very carefully. It's an ongoing discussion. which will have many facets in the days to come. But thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us today.
Thank you.